Welcome back to the Jacob Report. As early as next year, some major changes could be coming to some of the region's worst performing schools. Of the 52 worst performing schools in Missouri, 37 are in our area, 32 are public schools, 5 are charter schools. Now, this list is part of Missouri's application for federal school improvement grants, and under that program, these schools could face massive overhauls. Their teachers and principals could be replaced, entire staffs could be removed, or the schools could simply be shut down. A bold new plan, or a desperate act by educators who are out of any other ideas. Joining us to make sense of all of this is Kathleen Sullivan Brown. She's Associate Professor of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at the University of Missouri St. Louis College of Education. Among other things, she specializes in school reform efforts. Kathleen, good to see you again. So,
thank you.
What could, with 37 schools that are having problems, we saw a couple of weeks ago schools in Kansas City being shut down in a wholesale manner. What's going to happen to these schools? Are entire staffs going to be fired, or schools going to be shut down in the city and districts like Normandy, Riverview Gardens, elsewhere where they've been found to fail? I mean, what is this?
Well,
what are we on the edge on?
Okay. We haven't heard yet any specific plans, but we have a new commissioner of education in the state of Missouri. Of course, we've got the new president with his administration and Secretary Arnie Duncan. And I think they've looked at these problems of low-performing schools that we've had for so many years, and they're saying, how can we finally get a handle on this? And of course, under No Child Left Behind, there were these sanctions that schools could be closed, and everybody heard about the situation in Rhode Island recently where they wanted to wholesale fire 93 teachers. To me, that doesn't make a great deal of sense, because it's hard for me to believe that that some portion of that staff isn't doing a good job, just like in any other organization. But this could be an opportunity to do what they call a restart, to look at a new curriculum, bring in a new principal, have teachers apply for their jobs, so you hire back the good ones.
Now, so when a school is failing, when schools are failing this badly, I mean, as someone who knows education intimately, is it most often a failure of the school, that is incompetent teachers, lazy administrators, or is it a failure of the surrounding neighborhood and parents who don't bother to be engaged with the school? In other words, there's only so much the schools can do. Which is it? Are the schools being punished for entire collapsing systems and parents who are indifferent in these neighborhoods, or is it the fault of the schools and the teachers?
I think it's probably all of the above. One of the people that I look to help with this is a man named William Julius Wilson. He talks about concentrated poverty. If you look at these low-performing, failing schools, it's not all of public education. It is, for the most part, it's schools that are in neighborhoods where the social fabric is really unraveling. You have parents who are themselves not high in literacy. They don't have resources in the home. You may have problems with administrators and teachers, but it's because they're dealing with all these overwhelming problems.
Okay, so the corollary to that would be, what good will a reform like this, however well-meaning, do if the problem really isn't replacing what's inside the bricks and mortar? The problem would be essentially redoing an entire neighborhood. There's where the problem is. I mean, will this help?
Well, I think it depends on what you do with the money. Each of these schools theoretically would get about $2 million. Mm-hmm. To do what? I mean, the question is, if you had $2 million and a school that was really struggling, what would you do? What would I do?
It depends on what you mean by struggling, I guess.
Basically struggling academically. And the idea of what we've always thought is, with great teaching, any child can learn. With the percentage of children who can't learn because of traumatic brain injury or something like that is so small. So the vast majority of children can learn with the right teachers and the right resources. But I think we really need to rethink, especially urban education. We've had charter schools, and charter schools were originally designed to be laboratories of innovation. Well, they haven't really done that. If you walked into a charter school and a regular school, I'm not sure that you'd really tell the difference.
And indeed, 5 of these schools that are on this failing list are charter schools.
So even with the charter school experiment, I don't think we've found the key to what do we need to do in communities that are struggling like that. I think we need to do something radically different. I think we need to perhaps, if you ask me what I would do with the money, I would probably say I would change and I would use some of that money to get teachers in there who want to be there, who want to be working in those buildings, and who have a track record of working with students in those communities and helping those students do the basics, learn to read, basic numeracy, and move those children. And on the list, it's I think 17 elementary schools, 5 are middle schools, and 4 of them are high schools. It's one thing to help an elementary building, but you've got middle school and high school students who are that far along and they still don't have those basic skills.
So, I mean, what do? You can't send a bunch of high school juniors back to 6th grade.
No, but I think you really do have to go back and look at what are the kinds of activities. And maybe they're not the traditional middle class school where we sit kids down in desks and ask them to do paper and pencil activities. We need to find out, for example, a lot of people say when students they leave school and they go into the military seems to get their attention and be able to train them, and some of them go on into later skills in very interesting high skill occupations. How does the military do that?
Well, doesn't the military do it by largely taking them out of these neighborhoods? I mean, I have heard that in some cases, some educators would talk about trying to turn some of these schools essentially into boarding schools. If these kids can get out of their homes and get someplace where academic rigor is enforced and learning is valued and they're nurtured rather than seeing all this dysfunction around them all the time, it might work. I mean, is that too extreme, or might be that be part of the mix?
I think that might be. There was a superintendent a few years ago who suggested that we needed boarding schools, especially for young African American males, because they weren't getting what they needed. I have a problem with that because I think it's unfair to blame parents who are themselves not very literate and able to help their children. My own mother finished 1 year of high school, but she was strongly pushed reading. And if kids are not reading by the time they leave 3rd or 4th grade, it's not that it can't happen later, but it's much more difficult, and we have to do something quite different for those kids.
With this new program that's identified these schools, I mean, do you think, you mentioned it being an opportunity for radical change. Do you think that'll actually happen, or do you think the money just might evaporate, as it quite often does in these things, where you've got a little here and a little there, and at the end of the day, you don't see where the difference has been made?
Well, I think that is a problem, because there is a tendency, I teach this in some of my classes to aspiring principals. I say one problem is don't spread the money around and underfund everything. That's just a recipe for failure. I think there will be some closed schools because the enrollment in many of these districts is falling, St. Louis schools in particular. So there will have to probably be some closures, which I know neighborhoods and families hate that. But if you close some schools, and then I think if we could do some real brainstorming over what might be a radical experiment that would work, camping type experiences. A lot of schools have these kinds of things. Nothing that I'm saying is that radical, but a Montessori or an art-based program, a music-based program, somewhat in the way we think of the magnet schools, to get the attention of the students and get them engaged in their learning. Students who are engaged in their learning tend to learn. They don't mentally drop out before they physically drop out of school.
So a final quick question, given